Thank you for making time out of your busy schedules to be here. I'm also just quite amazed at your country. I've been traveling with my family, and we spent some time in Cusco and Machu Picchu, and it's such an amazing country that you have here. All we've met was people who are very warm and welcoming, so I really do appreciate that. And I get to travel quite a bit in my role. In the last 2 years, I've probably traveled to 70 cities around the world, and there are some amazing places, but there's few places that when you see the country and it takes your breath away, not a lot of places are like that. And I'm Canadian, and we have some pretty nice places as well, but there's something magical here, so you know, it's an amazing place, so I'm quite excited to be here. So a little bit about why are you here? In the last few years, as Inez said, you know, I've spent my career in the leadership area, largely because very, very early in my career, my very, very first full-time job was with a large public sector organization. And we did very, very important work. We helped some of the neediest people in our society, help them get their lives back on track. These are people who were desperate. They needed financial assistance, they needed help finding jobs, they needed help getting back to school, and our organization helped them. So I was really excited about doing that work. But what I noticed very quickly was the day-to-day environment of the organization. There was no inspiration. Even though the work was really important, you walked in and you saw all the co-workers come in every day, Monday to Friday, with their heads down. No excitement, no energy. And when you look to your manager or your supervisor for inspiration, they were the same, just going through the motions, Monday to Friday. And there I was, 24 years old, and I asked myself, is this it? Is this what the world of work is going to be like? And all I have to do now is show up for the next 40 years and be a loyal employee? And maybe at the end, I'll retire and they'll have a little ceremony for me and off I go. And I said, no, there's got to be more to it. And I was very fortunate to then meet a senior leader, a senior manager in that organization named Zinta. And she saw something in me. And I realized, wow, that's something that really strong leaders do. They see something in a person that sometimes you don't even see in yourself. And she came to me one day. She wasn't even my manager. She was my manager's manager's manager. And she said, I see what you're doing, Vince, with your clients, and it's great work. And I hear good things. But I think you want to have more impact here. And I didn't know how, I did, but I didn't know how she knew that. And she said, listen, I'm going to set up a small committee, a small group of us, to try to change the climate in this workplace. And I was so excited. Finally, I had a chance, because I enjoyed my job. The job was meaningful, but I wanted the workplace to be more enthusiastic, more exciting. So off we went, a small group with me, Zinta, and a few colleagues, and we started to change things around. Even though the office was really old desks, really, you know, old walls and ceilings, that didn't matter. There was more positivity, more enthusiasm. And there I was, early in my career, realizing, wow, one leader can make a real difference to the workplace of an environment. We had one individual, his name was Wayne, and he was the head of the union. And he was always in a bad mood, right? Even Wayne started to get more positive. And I thought, wow, if we can connect with Wayne, we could do some amazing things here. And then disaster struck. Zinta was diagnosed with lung cancer and had to leave the organization to start her treatments. We were all devastated by that news. But what I noticed in her absence was ever so slowly, that organization, everything we started to put in place, started to go back the way it was. The energy, the enthusiasm almost disappeared. But then I started to notice something else. Our most senior managers, the ones who ran everything, came to our small committee that Zinta set up while she was away. And we thought they were going to come to congratulate us for all the great work we were doing. But they didn't do that. You know what they did? They said, we want you to stop doing that. You just focus on your job and you leave the organizational work to us. Now we were confused. As the months went by, I heard through my colleagues and my coworkers that Zinta was not doing well, and I felt I had to go visit her in her home, which I did. And as I approached, her front door, she was waiting for me, and I could see that the disease was winning. She was not looking well. And there we sat in her living room, and she started to ask me about what my experience was while she was away. And I didn't want the attention to be on me, but she began to ask, and I told her about my frustration, my confusion, how all of our work seemed to reverse almost immediately while she was gone. And then she opened up, and she started to talk about story after story of her experience as a senior leader in that organization with her peers and senior management. It was a toxic culture that she described. Infighting, right? Everybody fighting every day against one another. Politics, sabotaging each other, a high-stress, negative environment. And then she said, Vince, I've never smoked a cigarette in my life. I've always taken care of my health, and I have no history of lung cancer in my family. I'm convinced the disease I'm fighting today is a direct result of the stress I endured being in that toxic culture. Now, those words really hit me. And I said, wow, could that be the case? Could that have contributed to her health? Well, we know today, not back then, we know today the impact of stress on our health. In fact, a new book is out by Jeffrey Pfeffer, who's a professor at Stanford in California. And in his research on a new book that's out now, it's called Dying for a Paycheck. He says that workplace stress is the 5th leading cause of death in the United States. 2 weeks after I did that visit, she sent me a letter. This was a time when people still used to write letters to each other. And in that letter, she challenged me. First, I was surprised to get it. She didn't have to worry about me, but that's the kind of person she was. In her time of need, she reached out to me. And she said, so what are you going to do, Vince? She challenged me. And it's a letter that I've kept since I was 25, 26 years old. And I share the letter in my book, The Leadership Contract, because in that letter, I believe there's a message for all of us. We have to make a decision around what we need to do as leaders, but more importantly, not what we need to do for ourselves, but the kind of cultures and workplaces that we have to create for our employees. Because if you can create vibrant cultures, if leaders can really work together in a strong and positive way, I believe every employee will feel it, and I believe every customer will feel it. And I believe that's the opportunity. And I've spent my time, since that time, I decided I have to leave this organization, which I did. And there I was, 26 years old, and I decided to become an entrepreneur. I had nothing to offer the world. But I decided this is the work I have to do. I was lucky early in my career to work with a person who I thought was a great leader. Now, 2 weeks after I got that letter, Zinta passed away. And I knew that organization was never going to change. And that's why I decided that I had to leave. And so, fast forward to today. Fast forward to the last couple of years. And it's been a fascinating time when you're a person like me. Like you, I've had and held, and I do hold leadership roles. I know what it's like to own a P&L. I know what it's trying to figure out growth. I know what it's like to try to run a business during financial crisis. I've worked through 12 integrations and acquisitions as a business leader. Through my academic work, I've done research in leadership, right? And I've consulted with hundreds of leaders like yourselves around the world. This is what I do, because I believe at the end of the day, leadership is what matters. But in the last 2 years, I've been traveling the world, and every time I landed in a city, there was a major leadership story unfolding. In March of 2016, I landed in Sao Paulo, Brazil for the first time. It was a Sunday morning, a beautiful Sunday morning. As I arrived, I'm in the taxi cab, driving to my hotel, and I text my colleague saying, just to let you know, I've arrived, I'll see you tonight for dinner. And she immediately texted me back, oh, your ride to the hotel is going to take a long time because of the protests. I said, protests? I didn't know what was happening. So I quickly Googled the protest. I talked to my taxi cab driver. And I don't know if you remember, but that was the day when millions and millions of Brazilians took to the streets to protest corruption in government in some of their major organizations. I'm a Canadian. Canadians don't protest. It's not our nature. So for people to go to the street, not just a few people, millions of people to go to the street to protest, it kind of shows you what happens. Right? Even a couple of weeks ago, I was in Italy when the head of Fiat and Chrysler, Sergio Marconi, passed away. And Italians were talking about what's going to happen to the company now. And he had a very unique style of leadership. Not one that I would necessarily advise, but it worked. He grew the value of the company 11 times as a CEO. It didn't matter where I landed, there was always a significant story. Spent a lot of time in the United States before the election. And Americans are saying, are these the two best people we have? And then after President Trump became President Trump, they said, what do we do now? Well, you see what's going on now. So this question, what does it mean to be a leader today, I believe is the most important question we have to answer for ourselves personally, and what we have to answer for our companies and our organizations. So I'm going to ask you to engage in a quick activity. As a way of coming to an event like this, you know, you can come and just listen to me, but it's more valuable if you have a chance to connect with the people in the room, because there's a lot of smart people here with a lot of great leadership experience. So I want you to think for a moment about how would you answer the question, what does it mean for you to be a leader today? So imagine, the day starts, 15, 20 words on the flip chart. And then the facilitator says, as you experience the day, and new ideas come to mind, go to the flip chart and just write those new words. By the end of the day, in just about 6 hours, that list of 15 to 20 words grows to 50, 60, 70, sometimes 80 different words describing and answering the question, what it means to be a leader today. And when I look at that list of all those words, it immediately becomes clear, being a leader is a big job today. The expectations are extremely high, and you know that. What's also interesting is that that list of words isn't just for the CEO, isn't just for the executive committee or senior management. It's for everybody in a leadership role, whether you're a team leader, a supervisor, a middle manager, a director, a vice president, or an executive vice president. The expectations are high, and they're the same for everybody. And then when I personalize it and look at those words based on my own current leadership role, I kind of go, can I do all those things? Can I do all those things? Can I be inspirational, motivational, emotional, have impact, build my team, connect? Can I do all those things consistently well, Monday to Friday, every day of the year? But that's kind of where we're at with leadership today. And we really need to pause and reflect on it, because I think a lot of companies understand that leadership really matters. I believe it always does. Now imagine me being a leadership person. Everything I look at, I always look through a leadership lens. And over the last few days, as I was looking at some of the amazing ruins in your country, I was thinking, wow, what kind of leadership was required to build Machu Picchu? What did the Incas do to build what they did? We didn't understand how they did that. But it didn't happen by accident, right? Some kind of leadership was required to make that happen. So, we need leadership to be stronger than it's ever been, and yet when you look at a lot of the research currently, you see that it's not. And that's the problem. Whether it's stories of corruption, scandals, bad behavior, your country has experienced that, you're not alone though. A lot of countries do. Right? I mentioned Brazil. Right? We have a leading coaching company there, and one of my colleagues said, yeah, our coaching practice is way down because all of our clients are in jail. How does that happen? Doesn't matter where we go, that's an issue we have to address. But there's more. I write about it in the book. There's research that shows if you are an employee in a company that's embroiled in scandal, it actually affects your reputation as well. So a lot of times leaders don't appreciate the impact it has on everybody. We started to work with a company in Canada, a large global construction company, on a leadership development initiative. And one morning, the story broke out that 2 executives were caught up in a large scandal that involved human trafficking, which was just an unbelievable story between the Middle East and other parts of the world. The CEO was unaware of what was happening. And my colleague, Alex, who's based in Montreal, that's where their headquarters is, calls me saying, I had a meeting with the client. I can't get in. The police have put yellow tape around the whole building. And when we finally did the leadership program, the employees, the leaders, were saying, I used to, one leader had a sweater with the company logo. He goes, I used to wear this with pride. And now this doesn't create pride for me anymore. So there's a price that we pay when that happens. Look at employee engagement. And I've been studying this for decades. It's the same story around the world. Only about 20 to 25% of employees are actually fully engaged in their jobs. And the rest are either moderately engaged or completely disengaged. How are we going to be successful? In fact, Gallup did a large study of over, I think it was 12,000 US managers, and found 66% of them were actively disengaged in their jobs. I mean, I can understand if an employee is struggling, but when you are in a management or leadership role, that's not possible. It's hard to lead if you are disengaged. How do you inspire? How do you motivate? And what they also found was a big percentage of those leaders, and someone raised it, didn't care about the company. How can we be successful? Right? So, this is kind of the big stories we all know about. But what we were hearing was something else from my clients. We were also seeing another problem, a more subtle problem, where they were saying, you know, Vince, we're investing in leadership development, but we're not seeing that translate into stronger leadership. And when I kind of tried to figure out what was happening, it was really an issue around accountability. That essentially we have people in leadership roles who don't really understand what it means to be a leader today. Now, it's not necessarily all their fault. The world around them has changed considerably. The expectations have changed considerably, and they're struggling to keep up. Part of the challenge is, and you won't see this in the back, and we'll make sure you get these slides, the world has changed for leaders. This is a number of research studies from KPMG, McKinsey, and the Corporate Executive Board. So, KPMG studied a number of CEOs, and 72% of them said that the next 3 years are going to be more critical to their company's future than the last 50. It's a pretty dramatic statement coming from CEOs. And as a result of that, 42% believe that their companies have to transform fairly quickly. And someone talked about the need for transformation. McKinsey has found that when companies are transforming, it has a direct impact on the leaders themselves. They have to change and adapt new mindsets, new ways of working. However, the problem is we're trying to transform in an era where, and the Corporate Executive Board found in their survey of senior leaders, that the magnitude of change has just amplified and increased than ever before. And 62% of leaders say, we find ourselves in new situations we have never encountered. And 64% say that these are situations that are very different from the past. So nothing that you have ever done prepares you for what's coming. So that's the world of leadership. I believe that's one of the reasons why leaders are struggling. So what's the impact on this on organizations? This accountability gap that I talk about. Well, here's what I hear from my clients as I travel the world. First, we see leaders who are not enthusiastic about the future of the organization. We're going to come back to that point later. That they basically don't demonstrate ownership for their roles or executing the strategy of the company. That they kind of work in silos and sometimes work at cross purposes to one another, slowing down change, right, and not moving fast enough. That they somehow come to accept mediocrity in themselves and in their teams. And in today's world, accepting mediocrity is not a good thing. We're actually going to come back to that. That they demonstrate they really don't invest in developing themselves and others. That they are led more by personal agenda and politics rather than what's best for the company. So when Zinta talked about my colleague, when she talked about the environment that she worked in, the toxic environment, that was it, right? That was it. It was all this leaders leading more out of personal agendas. That they don't have the courage to tackle difficult problems, we'll come back to this later, and that they really aren't, really aren't really enthusiastic about the future. So here we are. We're seeing this theme of accountability play out over and over and over again, so we decided to do some research. We need to understand it more because there was no research on leadership accountability. So we went to our clients globally. LHH works in 65 countries around the world, most of whom are in the global Fortune 500. And what we found of over, right now it's probably close to 3,000 respondents, 72% said that leadership accountability is critical to their company's success, but there's only 31% satisfaction. And when we look at the data from Peru, it's almost exactly the same. 71%, a little better on the satisfaction, but it's pretty much the same number. That's the accountability gap that exists in your country and exists globally. We kind of looked at some other things. Has your company set clear leadership expectations of leaders? And to what extent are leaders really committed to their roles as leaders? So again, not great, 49%, 45%. And in Peru, it's actually stronger than most of the other countries. So we'll talk a little bit about why we think that's the case. 66 and 52%. Now, what we also have been doing was a global study on trying to understand what is it about leaders when they're mediocre? And what is it about it? And in South America, we've had 1,200 respondents so far. So the first thing they do is that they blame others, right? That they're sort of selfish. They make excuses. They don't treat people well, right? And they really don't show any initiative. They don't take action. So we're starting to understand what ineffective leadership looks like. Now, when we were doing the global study, we wanted to look at, was there a connection between company performance and leadership accountability? So we asked in the study one question. We asked, think about your company's performance over the last 3 years, and are you an industry leader? Is your performance in the top quartile, top 25%? Are you above average or average? Are you below average? Or are you a poor performer in the bottom 25%? When we analyzed the data, it was fascinating. Even above average performing companies, they looked more like poor performing companies than they did industry leading companies. Very interesting. So all we did is then compare the industry leading companies with the rest. So what you will see here is to what extent is leadership accountability critical? Well, everyone says it's critical. There's no disagreement there. But look at the difference in satisfaction. Among the industry-leading companies, they have over 2 times more satisfaction with the accountability demonstrated by their leaders compared to the other companies. They've done a better job of communicating expectations, and they have more leaders committed to their roles as leaders. So this is showing us there's a strong connection between accountability and company performance. And it makes sense. It's obvious. Those leaders in that video are never going to get you there. Ever. No matter how much money you spend in developing them, there's something lacking in their approach. And in Peru, it's pretty much the same story. In fact, the differences are almost a little even more dramatic than the global data. The industry-leading companies we surveyed in Peru, far more, they believe leadership accountability is more critical. It's almost 3 times more satisfied, about 40% more around setting expectations. So there's some even more dramatic differences here in terms of what the industry-leading companies do. Now, we wanted to understand, okay, we understand what mediocre leaders look like, but what do truly accountable leaders do every single day? Particularly in those industry-leading companies. So we asked, think about the leaders in your company who are truly accountable, and what is it that they do differently every day? And 5 behaviors emerge globally. First, they set high expectations for themselves and their teams. 2, they have the courage to make difficult decisions and tackle tough issues. Again, I'll come back to that later. 3, they're very good at communicating the strategy throughout the organization, because that's really a fundamental aspect of accountability. If I, as an employee, am unclear about what's expected of me, what I do every day, and how it contributes to our success, it's easy for me to go, well, whatever. But if my leader sits me down and says, here's your job, here's what you're doing, here's where we're trying to go, and why I need you to be successful at delivering against these objectives, now we can have a conversation. It's obvious, but some studies have shown, when you ask employees, how many of you can tell me what the strategic priorities of your company are? Only 5% of employees can do that. So there's a problem. Leaders express optimism about the future and its company. Interesting. They're excited to be in the company, and they show that every day. Think back to the organization I worked with early in my career, when the leaders did not inspire, did not motivate, and the impact I know it had on me. And finally, this is very interesting. They demonstrate clarity about what's happening in the business environment. So while they focus on execution, they're always kind of looking up and seeing what's coming next. What should I anticipate? Okay, so you came here on a Monday morning to have some ideas, to have some of your own optimism. And all I've done to this point in time is depress you with how bad things are. And, it's not about being negative or pessimistic. I'm ultimately a realist. But the research and the data really speaks for itself. And the work we're doing, here and elsewhere, is we're bringing this issue to our clients to say, this is something you have to be paying attention to, because there's something still missing. Companies are investing $65 to $70 billion globally, that's the estimate, on leadership development. And if we look around the world, yes, there's some phenomenal companies out there, here as well. But those are the few. And my goal is I want to help as many organizations as possible be successful, because we need companies to be successful, because of the impact they have on our economies in creating meaningful work for people, right? Creating livelihood for all the companies that are part of the supply chain. We need companies to be successful. Every time I see a company that fails, I always get upset and frustrated. Particularly, why did that happen? And ultimately, the story comes down to they missed something in the environment, they couldn't change quickly enough, but it's all about leadership at the end of the day. So the way forward, I believe, is that we need to start changing kind of our mindset when it comes to leadership, And I thought a lot about what's the solution, and to me, it came down to this idea of a contract, a leadership contract. So here's kind of my rationale. I believe it's human nature for us to hold anyone we see as a leader to a higher standard of behavior. Whether that person is the president of a country, or in our case, my case, the prime minister of a country, whether that person is a CEO, whether that person is the mayor of a city, you're going through municipal elections now, whether that person is a teacher, the coach of a team, it does not matter what the leadership role is. We think leader as humans, we expect more, and we should. That leaders, people who are in leadership roles, need to hold themselves to a higher standard of behavior. And when they let us down, when they fail, we get disappointed. And what also happens? When they also fail in a big way, corruption, scandal, bribery, the next immediate thing that humans do is we want to hold them accountable for their actions. So the connection between leadership and accountability are very much connected. There's a quote here by an American, John Gardner. He wrote a book a number of years ago on leadership, and he said that accountability is as important to the concept of leadership, and that those who are granted power must be held accountable. And so to me, this implies a contract, that when you take on a leadership role at any level, you have actually signed up for something really, really important. But I don't believe we do a good enough job helping people understand this idea of a contract. And in a day where the world is more demanding, the expectations are greater, and the pressure is greater, we need to help people who aspire to leadership roles, and even people in leadership roles today, to say, this is what it means to be a leader. I don't know if you're keeping track of Tesla and what Elon Musk has been going through in the last few weeks. Interesting article in the New York Times where you're starting to see the pressure that he's under, and he's starting to crack. And he's painting this sympathetic picture of himself. And I said, not good enough, buddy. You're the CEO of a major corporation. Get your act together. You need to lead at a higher level. No excuses. Because that's the job. It's a hard one, but that's the job. But here's what I think has happened. Instead of us thinking about a contract that you read and you sign, I think a lot of us have taken leadership roles a little more casually. Because a lot of times, when I ask people, I'm always curious, how did you get into a leadership role? How did you become a manager? It's surprising how many times people say, well, if I'm going to be honest, it was by accident. I was really good at something. I was a great accountant, I was a great analyst, I was a great engineer, I was a great planner, I was a great human resources, great compensation and benefits person. It doesn't matter what the area of technical expertise is. When you're really, really good at something, companies always come around and say, you're so good at this, we're now going to make you a leader of the team. Take you away from what you're really, really good at, and we're not going to support you, and we won't give you any development. Good luck. Off you go. That's the story. And Gallup has done global research. It's found two reasons how people get into leadership roles. Technical expertise is one, strong technical expertise. Or two, tenure. You've been around longer than everyone else. Neither of which prepare you for the demands and expectations. Again, I'm not being critical of the people. I'm just saying, we have to understand that this is happening. But here's what I think has happened. I think it's more like an online contract. You know, when you're online conducting any transaction nowadays, and at some point this window pops up. Now, I don't know about you, but when I'm multitasking and trying to get a lot done and the window pops up, Vince immediately scrolls down to the bottom, and I click agree. I didn't read anything. I know I'm bound to something. I'm not quite sure what it is. My fear, though, in the back of my mind is one day Amazon or Apple are going to come to my door and take away my 3 kids. It won't be a good day in our household. Liz, my wife, will say, didn't you read the terms and conditions? I go, sorry, I did. Now, studies show 93% of us never read the terms and conditions of online contracts. 93%. I want to meet the 7% that claim they do. I think they're lying. So, we have to understand that there is a leadership contract, and it comes with 4 terms and conditions. And in fact, we're really launching the Spanish translation of the leadership contract today. And I want to thank my colleagues Inez and Jimena and others in South America for making that happen. And we have to understand there are 4 terms and conditions. The first is that leadership is a decision. And what is this about? This is about understanding that once you are in that leadership role, even though you may have gotten in that role because of your strong technical expertise, you have to now start thinking of yourself as the leader first. I was doing a program a number of years ago, a leadership development program. And we had, 20 or 30 leaders in the room. And one of the participants said, Vince, can you just tell me, what is leadership? Just get right down to the most basic point. And I was thinking about this idea, and I said, I think it's a decision that we have to make in how we think of ourselves and define ourselves. And as I said that, one of the participants in an angry tone just said, I never got to make that decision. Now, if one of you reacted like that right now, we'd all be curious, what's going on with that person? So I asked him, okay, tell me, what's your reaction? His name was Earl, and he was an engineer by training, and he loved to be an engineer. Guess what? Early in his career, he got a promotion into a team lead role. And then he said he advanced to the company to the point where he was VP of Engineering Services for his construction company. And he said, at no point did I really pause and think about the decision I was making. In fact, even today, this was the great line. Even today, I think of myself as an engineer first, and leadership is my part-time job. And when he said that, the entire room went quiet. And when you do the kind of work that we do on LHH and facilitating sessions with leaders, when that happened in the room, what he just said, everyone else has thought of or experienced. And that's what we have to understand. I'm not critical of him, but that's the reality. We have a lot of people in leadership roles who think that the leadership role is a part-time job. We have to help them understand, once you are in a leadership role, it's your main job. It's your full-time job. It doesn't take away from your technical expertise at all. No. I have technical expertise. You have technical, we all have some kind of expertise. But once you're in a leadership role, you have to understand there's a decision around really defining yourself as a leader. And that's the starting point. If you don't start there, the rest doesn't matter. And a lot of leadership thinking and leadership programs fail to understand this. They make the assumption that everybody in the room has made the decision to be a leader. And they haven't. So we start by saying, start here first. And I can't tell you how many times we've had leadership programs where some participants are really frustrated. And we take them out of the room and say, okay, what's going on? And they say, I don't want to be here. Why? I got this job that I got to get to. But this is your job. You're a leader. Am I? Yeah. You're a leader. Oh, okay. They've never gone through the thinking process. So we need people who are fully committed, and what I say, all in from a leadership standpoint. What's next? Well, once you understand that it starts with decision, the next part is you've got to be clear on what your obligation is as a leader. Because at the end of the day, it's not about you, it's not about me, it's not about my self-interest, it's not about what's in it for me, it's about my customers, my employees, my shareholders, my stakeholders, the communities in which we do business. That's what it's about. That's what we expect. Why do we get so angry when leaders are embroiled in corruption and scandal? Because we say, you have broken the contract. We granted you power so you can help us be successful and you've abused that power for personal gain. You abuse that power for personal gain. Unacceptable. When Sam Palmisano he was a former CEO of IBM. He was a leader who, at the time, IBM grew quite considerably as a company financially, but he also left a legacy of investing in leadership development, and he's almost a philosopher of leadership. And there's videos of him. He's being interviewed in one interview on YouTube where he was asked, so what's your philosophy? How do you think about your obligation as a leader? He said, it's actually quite simple. The most important thing that I can do is to prepare the company and its people for the future and leave it in better shape than I found. Once you realize it's a decision, the second is that comes with obligation. And we are all going to be measured based on whether we left our company in better shape than we found it. We don't think about that every day, but it's true. Have some of your politicians left this country in better shape than they found it? No. And again, it's not just here. It's absolutely everywhere. We can see how they've done well. I don't understand how they left the country in better shape. So how are you leaving your organization in better shape than you found it? In our leadership contract programs, this is actually the hardest part of the day for the participants. We find very, very few leaders are clear on what their core obligation is. Next, leadership is hard work, and you have to get tough. Sometimes people assume a leadership role and think, perfect. Now everyone's going to do the work, and I'll just sit back, put my feet on my desk. No. It's a tough job. It's one of the toughest jobs there are. Easy to do if you want to be mediocre. Much harder if you want to be truly accountable and good at it. But here's the challenge, what we hear over and over again. We hear our clients say, our leaders really have a hard time with some of the hard work as it relates to people. They don't give candid feedback. They don't manage poor performers aggressively enough. They're afraid to make an unpopular decision, which might be in the best interest of the company, but they want to be popular. They want to be liked by their team, so they never do it. And what we don't realize a lot of times, and we all do it, I do it, there's conversations I'm avoiding. I'm very good at making excuses. I'm traveling the next 2 weeks in South America. I'll wait until I go back home. 2 weeks go by, a month goes by. But what we don't realize is in the book I talk about the hard rule of leadership, that when we avoid some of these challenging things in our roles, they might be legitimately challenging. We don't appreciate how it makes ourselves, our teams, and our company weaker. But if you have the courage to tackle the hard work, you make yourself, your team, and the company stronger. And so what's the hard work that you're avoiding? There's a great quote here that says, hard work spotlights the character of people. In the face of it, some will turn up their sleeves and say, okay, let's go. Let's get it done. Some will turn up their noses, not for me to do, I'm an executive vice president. And some don't turn up at all. You don't know where they are. And you can think about people in that way. It's about your character, right? Do you have the resilience and resolve? So what's the hard work that you're avoiding in your roles? Something that you need to think about. And the last point is this idea of, someone had mentioned this idea of connection, right? It's this idea of that now the new model of leadership is around building a sense of community. And what's fascinating to me is what I saw in my mid-20s in that organization, is that if we can get the leaders of the organization really working well together, in an aligned way where they're truly supporting each other, that's going to differentiate your company, right? There's some interesting research that Towers Watson has done that has found among surveying employees that when employees see senior management and the rest of the leaders working well together, they just look up at you and they can tell whether you're working well or not. when they see you working well together, their engagement goes up to 72%, their sense of engagement. They have confidence in the future, they want to support your success, right? But when they see senior management and other managers not working well together, their personal sense of engagement drops down to 8%. Now imagine trying to transform a company when engagement's at 8% versus 72%. Huge difference, right? So, now what this means is as leaders, we have to really start paying attention to this idea of leadership culture. Because if you are not, as you know, if you're not deliberate at defining the type of culture you need, as humans, we create culture. But you may end up with one that may not be what serves you well. So here's one culture. I call this the culture of zombies. This is what I joined early in my career. Everyone showed up Monday to Friday, just going through the motions. No energy, no passion, no vitality. And if you're a person in a leadership role that wants to be successful, you have to be very afraid, like she is. And you have to try to escape that culture. Because we've all seen the zombie movies and the zombie shows. There's a fundamental rule of zombies. Once you are bitten, you will become a zombie. There is no antidote. I read something recently, a person was writing to young people as they were entering the workforce. And his advice was, go in, look at people, look at your coworkers, right? And understand one rule. That you will become them in 3 years. They will not become you. Right? So we have to guard against this. Sometimes the culture of an organization is based on the charisma of one dominant leader. Sometimes the founder of the company or a very charismatic CEO. And if that person's a good person, it could be an amazing place to be. If that person is a tyrant, a dictator, or a bully, it's a different story. In either case, the challenge is, in my experience, is too much leadership on one person. It's an old model. And in today's world, it's too complex. I mean, the world is too complex. We're not going to have all the answers. It can work for a period of time. But as a company becomes more complex, it needs to be more sophisticated, and it needs more leadership at the helm. And then we see this culture. I call this sort of the racetrack, the stable of thoroughbreds. Imagine sales, marketing, R&D, operations, manufacturing, corporate, legal, HR, all in their own little stalls, racing to a finish line, the horses with the blinders on. But they don't realize they end up competing against one another. I've worked with companies in a room like this with 100 or 100 top 200 leaders, and sometimes you can feel that the competition inside the room is greater than what they face in the marketplace. And sometimes, I remember one meeting in particular where they started fighting with one another, and I had to stand on top of the table and yell at them and say, ladies and gentlemen, I need to remind you, the competition is out there, it's not in here. They had completely lost perspective. So when I talk to clients about what would a strong community of leaders look like, 10 characteristics emerge. First, leaders are clear on the strategy of the organization. 2, they create excitement about the future. 3, they have an aspiration to be great leaders. They set the bar high for themselves. 4, that they bring kind of what I hear, a one company mindset. So I may lead sales, or I may lead R&D, or I may lead operations, but I do that thinking about the company as a whole. 5, that we give each other feedback. We call out unproductive behavior when necessary. We celebrate important milestones tied to the strategy. That we break down silos so we can work effectively and collaborate. That we put personal agendas to the back, not at the front and center. Right? That's not why we're the primary reason that we're there. That we demonstrate resolve and resilience in the face of adversity. I worked with one CEO who was new to a company, and he was working with the top 80 leaders. Sorry, hold on. one of the problems of lots of hotels and flights. And he said to his leaders, top 8, he said, my test of this group is going to be when we face a challenge, I'm going to see how you respond. And in the face of the challenge, are you going to turn on each other, or are you going to turn to each other? It was a really interesting way of kind of how he was going to measure that team. And finally, you know, they kind of support each other. High degree of trust in leadership. Now I know some of you look at that list and go, Vince, I don't know what you're talking about. That's a little naive, don't you think? Well, what's been surprising to me is how many times in my work with CEOs, this is the slide, like some of you are doing now. I say, this is the slide I want. Because this is what we have to create. Because if we create this, this is going to be a differentiator for our company. You've got to be clear on the obligation. What am I there to do? How am I going to leave my company in better shape than I found it? It's a lot of hard work. Do you have the resilience and resolve to tackle it? Because if you don't, you weaken yourself, you weaken your team, and you weaken your company. And finally, the new model is around community. How do you work with your colleagues in a way to create a strong leadership culture that really differentiates you in the market? So personally, again, I want to thank my colleagues for inviting me to this event, and I want to thank you for being here. I'll stick around afterwards if anyone wants to chat. But thank you so much for being here and engaging in the conversation. I always learn a ton, and I wish you all the best. Go out there and be accountable leaders, everybody. See ya.